All right, today we're talking about creating a chain reaction for good. So, in looking at the past several weeks at Unity of Tampa, it has been so obvious to me how quickly a chain reaction of good is set into motion by the people here. One person gets an idea and somebody else joins them and another one joins them, and this chain reaction of good starts to occur. It's something I think we should all be proud of here. But it's just as easy in life to set off a negative chain reaction. Just because we've used the wrong words or we've taken the wrong act or we've made a decision that was not the right one, and we didn't pause and we didn't think and we didn't reflect before we acted. I've been the recipient of a few negative chain reactions in the last few weeks. And as I sort of watched it all unfold, I realized how important it is to recognize whenever that gets set off, it was never intended for what it turns out. If people really knew what was about to take place, they wouldn't do it. None of us would. But we all know what it's like to do something, say something, and watch it get bad really quickly, right? So my question to us today is, how many of us are consciously paying attention on a regular basis to the responses or the reactions we have without considering the impact? Where we pick up that phone and say, oh, I'm getting them on the phone now. Where we send the email and we're typing so loud that the person could hear it even if we didn't hit send. Those moments when we're over course correcting and reacting, sometimes to just a word or a sentence or to a small act. In every action we take, we have to choose whether we become a positive force for good or a negative one. It's that simple. Which way are you going to go? What are you going to do? What choice are you going to make? And while we may never intend it, we do it because we didn't stop and reflect and think about, should I say or do what I'm about to say or do? Now, as humans, we're pretty good at understanding how energy works. Think about this as energy. Negative energy, positive energy. And the best way I would say to do this is think of the simple things in life you already know. So if you set a pot on the stove to boil and you let it keep going, what happens? It overflows. And you usually have a mess to clean up. If you push the gas pedal on your car and you keep it there, what happens? Nothing good. Nothing good. You've either taken down a fence or a person, right? Hit another car, something. And just verbalizing anger to someone is reflected back to us in seconds just by the look on the person's face. The person looking back at us is enough for us to know this didn't turn out the way we may have intended. Whatever we say or do will send that energy in motion, and it's guaranteed to have an impact on someone or something. Now, we talk a lot about grand gestures. We read about grand gestures in our world. Oh, this person gave $2 million away, or this person started a new hospital, or whatever it is. But the truth is, the smallest acts, and we've had good news stories here, where the act of a 4-year-old set something positive in motion. So gestures don't need to be grand to set something off into a good space. Think about honeybees, for example. Just honeybees. How big are they, right? Okay, They come together and produce $19 billion worth of produce, agricultural crops in the United States alone. $19 billion, something this big. But they join forces, they all come together, and they do that. Those are actions that remind us of the butterfly effect. And some of you may know what the butterfly effect is. The idea is that it comes from the idea that the simple act of a butterfly flapping in its wings in China could produce a tornado in Texas, as that small act builds and builds and builds. Now, it's not a literal thing. It's a reminder that the small wind can turn into a big wind. And that happens in our own lives when we're not paying attention. And while it's never intended that we act that way, we have to be mindful that we're choosing that. We are choosing it. There's a book called The Vocation of Man, written by Johann Fichte, and it was written in 1800. And he wrote, "You could not remove a single grain of sand from its place without thereby changing something throughout all parts of the immeasurable whole." One single grain of sand. And if you've ever played Jenga, you know how that works. You can build a gigantic tower, and one tiny piece moved the wrong way takes the tower down. Deepak Chopra wrote in his book, The Law of Karma, which is often referred to as the law of cause and effect. He explained in the book that every action generates a force of energy that returns to us in like kind. In other words, we reap what we sow. And he gives us 3 pieces of advice to consider. The first one, he says, is that we become witnesses to the choices we make. That we start paying attention to the choices that we make and become more conscious of how we operate. The second one is he asks us to stop and reflect and consider the consequences of our actions before we set them into motion. And the third one, which we work on every single week, is to understand the importance of going within and seeking inner guidance before we do anything. Every one of us was born with the capability of having all of what we need if we would only understand that powerful connection that exists within us. During Reverend Alan Moss's service last Saturday, I talked about the importance of understanding that we're all part of a tapestry, and that every one of us is part of someone else's tapestry. And so if you think of it like that and you imagine one part of the tapestry jumping up and down and screaming, you can imagine what happens across the entire tapestry. One behavior can set the whole thing in motion in the wrong direction. Every thought, emotion, word, behavior will have an impact on each other because of one person. But if we thought of ourselves as being a center of influence and understanding how important it is, we wouldn't do ridiculous things. We wouldn't say ridiculous things. We wouldn't be hurtful. We would understand that as a center of influence, we can influence positive change in ourselves and in the world. But it all starts by us taking care of our need to grow. Recognizing that the only way for growth to occur in life is for us to transform ourselves. Because everything that's on the inside comes out. In case you haven't noticed. So when you're yelling at someone about something ridiculous, it actually has nothing to do with what is happening in front of you. You had to have that stored up somewhere. And it comes out like a bad balloon bursting all over people. Think of it as growing ourselves spiritually in order to blossom in the world and help the world blossom too. Author John Hyder does a great job of explaining the influence we have, and I like how he puts it. He says, if your life works, you influence your family. If your family works, your family influences the community. If your community works, your community influences the nation. If your nation works, your nation influences the world. Spiritual healer Marcia Martin provides her insights on how we can improve our inner growth. And she said all of our negative programming holds us back and sets into motion a chain reaction of negative perspectives about ourselves and life in general. So if we're the naysayer, the one who's always looking for the bad in the world, we're affecting everyone by what we say. And unless you're living in a bubble, that stuff burns. How many of you, like me, have thought for an entire week over one thing somebody said to you? You swear you let it go, but it's still there. How many of you have made it past a week with that? Okay, how many of us are still carrying it around year after year? One thing someone said. And at this point, is it even verifiable? We've carried it around so long, I don't even know that it's still valid. But why do we do that to ourselves? There's nothing good coming from it. Marcia Martin said, eliminate old patterns and beliefs that no longer serve our growth experience. And she tells us that in doing so, we eliminate the domino effect of negative programming. Now, here's the one you all understand. So we sometimes, in our one act, we don't realize that it's going to lead to other acts. So James Clear talks about people and their tendency to use their phones. I know none of you know what this is. He says you may find that the habit of checking your phone leads to the habit of clicking social media notifications, which leads to the habit of browsing social media mindlessly, which leads to another 20 minutes of procrastination on anything you were intending to do. Chain reaction. But he also points out that we can create a chain of positive changes, even unintended. And he uses the idea that you may go to the gym. If you stick to the habit of going to the gym, he said, then you may find yourself more focused at work, sleeping better at night, and even though you never had the intention to have a better day at work and sleep better, that one act turns a lot of things into positive change. But he refers to somebody named B.J. Fogg, who uses a great analogy as well in his chain reaction of good. He says we can never just change one behavior because our behaviors are so connected. When we change one behavior, other behaviors are going to shift automatically. And this is what makes the chain reaction for good, of good, so important. Because if all of our behaviors are connected, stay with me for a minute, all of our behaviors are connected, and we're all connected to each other, then the chain can actually never be broken. Now, if you thought about what kind of influence that is, you, as one tiny center of influence in that tapestry, and the chain can't be broken, everything you do is going to play out somewhere else. the president of an international Buddhist forum for peace, culture, and education, explained our interconnection in a way that shows how individual self-improvement can lead to a better society. He said, human evolution is the idea that a self-motivated, positive change in one's inner life will create a change in one's destiny. Then, as each of us carries out the process of inner evolution, we create that domino effect that begins to change and transform society and create peace for collective good. Now, I don't need to tell you, in Unity, we talk about this simply in our 5 principles. What's the first principle say in Unity? God is good, present in everyone, everywhere. Let's just start there. What's the second one tell us? I am naturally good because that center, that God source, that divinity is within me. So we can just stop there with the first 2 and remember how important it is to recognize we aren't just human, we are divine beings. We're blessed divine beings. We have the power to choose, the power to decide, the power to change. Changing our behaviors to improve our lives changes how we act toward each other. There are so many stories about people who, in the process of improving their own lives, made an impact on the world, but my very favorite story is about a teacher. Some of you may have heard me tell this many years ago in a different scenario. She wanted to improve her understanding and ability to help her 3rd grade students who came from underprivileged families. So she assigned homework asking them to complete the following sentence: I wish my teacher knew. Some of the answers she received were, I wish my teacher knew sometimes my reading log is not signed because my mom is not around a lot. I wish my teacher knew how much I miss my dad. He was deported to Mexico when I was 3 years old. The one that got her attention the most was, I wish my teacher knew I don't have pencils at home to do my homework. So she posted this on social media, just wanting to share. The next thing that happened is other people started doing the same thing. And in fact, Vice Admiral William Lee of the United States Coast Guard conducted a similar exercise saying, complete this for me. I wish my admiral knew. A Tennessee counselor of adolescents conducted the exercise, I wish my therapist knew. Advocacy groups for diseases and other causes began the process, and all of them grew in their understanding of how to help others. The point I want to make here is that we, as being consciously aware of the choices we make, can make the most impact from the simplest things. But it's conscious decision to decide which way to behave. So I want every one of us to think about who in our life we are currently impacting with our negativity, and who in our life are we currently impacting with our positivity. And not just positive thinking, positive words, positive actions. Ultimately, society's never going to change, and we can sit around complaining about it all we want, but it all begins with us. Let's review today's lessons. Creating a chain reaction of good occurs when, first, we understand the law of karma. We will reap what we sow in life. Number 2, embrace the butterfly effect. One small action can have a big impact. Number 3, make one positive change, which in turn changes our destiny. And number 4, think and act as one giant tapestry. Changes within change the world. The affirmation I wrote for us today is simple. I create a chain reaction of good. Let's say that together. I create a chain reaction of good. And our quote today is from Debasish Merida. And she said, you can change the world at this moment for better by changing your thoughts and by spreading your love for the world and humanity as a whole. Let's take that in. So we pause now to remind ourselves that we are more than an outer shell. We are divine beings of light and good. We were born of light and good. And our human behaviors are influenced by what we think and who we're around. But we can change that. Only we can make the decision to say something great to somebody or to hold back whatever negative thoughts we may be thinking of sharing. And to recognize the difference we would make in this big tapestry we live on. And to know that our actions do make a difference if we only choose them to be that way. And so it is. Amen.